These were the top 10 rookie wide receivers in ADP from rookie drafts back in May. And I don't really think that there's much to talk about with the top 4. We know who all 4 of them are. And the only one that I'm not currently buying into right now is Quentin Johnston. But wide receivers 5 through 9 are super interesting names. So let's dive into each of them to gauge their values as we head into the offseason. Starting first with Jonathan Mingo. Now, Justin and I have both been pretty much out on Mingo all draft season, and I think I can confidently say that we both are still out on Jonathan Mingo now. Don't get me wrong, he definitely piqued my interest over the past couple of weeks due to basically 2 season-high games back-to-back, especially when he saw 10 targets in the Panthers' first game without Frank Reich. I thought,
okay, maybe they're trying to see what they have in their young guys in a lost season, and maybe we're going to see some production from him to end the year.
And while that was a very nice thought last week, he then went out on this past Sunday and caught 2 passes for 22 yards. And while you might say,
but he had 9 targets though.
Normally, I would find that encouraging if that hasn't basically been the story of Jonathan Mingo's entire season this year. In his 12 games played, he has seen 6 or more targets in 8 of those games, and that's while playing over 85% of snaps in all but 1 game. So he is out there full time, week in and week out. He's seeing solid target numbers every single week, basically, and that just hasn't translated to really any production. He only has 377 receiving yards on the year, which is dangerously close to the 500-yard threshold that we look for rookie face planners as we get through the end of the season, and he is averaging only 4.95 yards per target, which is 80th out of 82 receivers in the league who have seen at least 30 targets, higher than only Trey Palmer and Kadarius Toney. So to me, he is a big time sell, especially to anyone that is seeing he has 19 targets over the last 2 weeks and wants to try to buy into him before the production comes, because I don't think that production is coming. So I'm looking to sell him for a 2024 second, or Elijah Moore, Jacoby Myers, Romeo Doubs, even Mike Williams, honestly, and just get a better asset with more hope for the future or more production right now. The next wide receiver is Josh Downs, who had an extremely fun breakout for about 6 or 7 weeks there at the beginning of the season before getting hurt in week 9, and unfortunately just has not been the same player since. But I do believe that Josh Downs has shown enough to be viewed as the long-term wide receiver 2 in this Colts offense because of that mid-season breakout. 5.5 receptions per game, 68 receiving yards per game, and a couple of touchdowns. And he was on a 17-game pace of 94 receptions for 1,150 yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. Like, that is what Devonta Smith is doing as the wide receiver 2 in Philadelphia. And I have to believe that the real Josh Downs is closer to that production than the numbers that we have seen from him more recently. Because like I said, he's been dealing with this knee injury since the beginning of November. He only played 20% of snaps in week 9, 25% in week 10. They had their bye week in week 11, and then week 12 and week 13, he still played under 70% of snaps, which he hadn't done at all prior to his injury. And then just this past week, he finally played over 75% of snaps as a more full-time player in this offense, but only saw 3 targets. So I'm definitely hopeful that Downs can continue to move away from his knee injury to end the year, and we'll see how the final 4 games of the season play out. But as we move into 2024 and he's healthy and he's more comfortable in year 2 of the NFL, year 2 in this offense, then I really think that Josh Downs could return to similar numbers as we saw earlier in the year. So he is definitely a big time buy for me at any kind of an injury discount right now. I would not pay a first round pick, but any second round pick, 2 second round picks, even if they're mid to late round picks, or look to pivot off of guys like Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper. Try to buy back some age for a player who is on the rise while those guys are on their way down. All right, but now we have to talk about Rashee Rice, who I think has personally become my favorite rookie wide receiver in this entire class right now, because it is all starting to come together for him as the Chiefs wide receiver 1. Since their bye in week 10, Rice has seen 9 or more targets in 3 out of those 4 games. And I know it's a small sample size, but he is on a 17-game pace of 1,200 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns on 144 targets. That is the upside that we know is there as the wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs, for Patrick Mahomes, and for Andy Reid. And the wildest part of this still is that he is still not playing a full-time role in this offense. He just played over 70% of snaps for the first time all year this past weekend. So those 2 games after the bye where he had 8 for 107 and 1 and 8 for 64, both were still while playing under 70% of snaps. I've actually said this a couple of times this year, most recently on the Friday AMA with John Paulson, that I fully believe that Rashee Rice is going to have an A.J. Brown rookie type of end of year season. In 6 games after the Tennessee Titans bye, A.J. Brown had 4 100-yard games and scored 5 touchdowns. In 4 games after the Chiefs bye this year, Rashee Rice already has 1 100-yard games and has scored 2 touchdowns. I am not kidding, guys. He is a borderline top 20 dynasty wide receiver for me. I would take him over Jackson Smith and Jigba and Zay Flowers in this rookie class, as well as Deebo Samuel, Nico Collins, Drake London, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, all those kind of guys. And he is in a tier for me with T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, and DJ Moore. Now, I'd still take those 3 ahead of Rashee Rice because they have longer track records. We just know who those receivers are. But I believe that Rashee Rice's upside and his age put him in that tier with those receivers. So I'm continuing to buy Rashee Rice while I think you still can. And even though his price is much higher than it was just a month ago, a month from now, his price is going to be so much higher than what it is today. Moving on, though, we have to talk about Marvin Mims. The once super hopeful receiver with all the production in the world has done basically nothing since the start of October. In fact, that 60-yard touchdown that he had back in week 2 is still the only touchdown that he scored all year and accounts for 20% of his receiving yards and almost 25% of his fantasy points on the season. He is averaging just 1.7 targets per game since week 4 and has only broken 25 receiving yards in a game once during that entire stretch. He has just been basically a complete non-factor in this Broncos offense, and to be honest, I don't have a ton of hope for the future. Jerry Jeudy is still signed through next year on his 5th-year option. Courtland Sutton is signed through 2025. And while, yes, they can save $10 million by cutting him in the offseason, why would they do that after the season that he is just now having? I really just hope that this doesn't turn into KJ Hamler 2.0, but the current situation and the complete lack of production on fairly modest playing time, if you will, is setting up to just tell the same exact story, which is super disappointing because I do think that Marvin Mims is talented and should be getting more work. So I'm not actively buying him right now, but I wouldn't be actively selling him right now either, unless you're getting a very productive veteran with way more production like Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin, even Courtland Sutton and Jacoby Myers I think are fine pivots if someone in your league still believes in Marvin Mims. But if you're not getting that, just hold on to him and hope for greener pastures ahead. And now we get to a super interesting name in Jayden Reed, who I think people believe has been having a mini breakout over the past few weeks, but honestly, nothing has really changed for Jayden Reed over his first 6 games of his career to his last 6 games. 5.2 targets per game, almost 40 receiving yards per game, and 3 total touchdowns in his first 6 games of his career. And then his last 6 games, all post-bye week for Jayden Reed, 5.5 targets per game, 47 receiving yards, 3 total touchdowns, including one just random 30-yard rushing touchdown. And he's playing the same number of snaps too, 35 snaps per game to start the year, 39 snaps per game over the last few weeks. So he really hasn't had a breakout at all. He's just been the same exact player with inconsistent production on a weekly basis because he's the Packers wide receiver 3 behind Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson. So it's really weird to see his value on Keep Trade Cut rise from wide receiver 50-ish at the beginning of November to now being wide receiver 30 in Dynasty ahead of George Pickens, Josh Downs, Christian Kirk, Hollywood Brown. Like, that's just entirely recency bias to move Jayden Reed up that much because of a couple solid games with 3 touchdowns in 4 weeks. I would love to buy into him, but his price makes it impossible to do that and is actually more on the side of selling Jayden Reed for wide receiver 30 prices than buying or even holding on to him. So those were the most interesting names from the 2023 wide receiver rookie class, but let me just quickly run through the rest of the top 20 from May ADP and give my 5-second take on what I'm doing with each of these guys. So Jalen Hyatt is definitely a hold for me as the most explosive receiver in the Giants receiving room. Hopefully next year he just gets more involved. Cedric Tillman, I guess, is a hold in deep leagues, but I don't really mind cutting him because he hasn't done much of anything, even after Donovan Peoples-Jones was traded. Kayshon Boutte is a cut. I don't even know why he's still on any of your rosters. Tank Dell, what a rise for him. Honestly, huge buy right now if you can get an injury discount. Anything less than a first-round pick is a smash trade accept, but I would pay a late first-round pick for him in 2024 up to like the 1.08 in Superflex leagues. Then we have Michael Wilson, who is a hold and honestly a nice stash for 2024. Hollywood Brown is a free agent, so maybe his situation improves even more with Hollywood Brown out and a fully healthy Kyler Murray next year. Tyler Scott is a cut. A.T. Perry, I'm honestly okay cutting him outside of like super deep leagues. Parker Washington is a hold or even add if he's still on waivers right now, and just see what happens in 2024 with Calvin Ridley being a free agent. Puka Nacua, I mean, come on, dude's elite. He's a dynasty wide receiver 1. Definitely buy him if you can for any prices cheaper than that. Trey Palmer, I am okay cutting, but Mike Evans is also a free agent, so maybe something happens positively for Trey Palmer, but I'm not really expecting it to, so I am okay cutting him if you have to. Xavier Hutchinson, I'm actually looking to add right now after Nico Collins' injury and with Tank Dell also being out for the year, but he's probably a cut once we get into January, so he's an add right now, cut in a couple of weeks. And then 2 names that weren't drafted in a rookie drafts back in May but have gained a lot of value. We have Demario Douglas and Dontavian Wicks, both of which are definitely holds and stashes through the offseason. Douglas especially, if you can buy him for a couple of thirds because he's been hurt, then I would actively be trying to do that. And then Charlie Jones is the last name that I wanted to mention as a stash, with Tyler Boyd being a free agent in 2024. You never know if he could become the new wide receiver 3 in Cincy next year when he's 100% healthy after the surgery that he had this year. But other than that, I really have no interest in anyone else, so if I didn't name them specifically, then you can just go ahead and cut them. But while we're on the subject of rookie wide receivers, the 2024 class is already shaping up to be an amazing group of players. So if you're interested in an early breakdown of my top 4 2024 rookie wide receivers, then you can check out that video right up here.